I trusted my son's first-class holiday plans with all my heart. Then he left me babysitting 5 wild children while he jetted off to paradise. I stood there in my kitchen, tears streaming down my face, wondering how I'd become so foolish. But before I tell you how deep this betrayal went, I want to share something with you. These stories aren't easy for me to tell. They're raw, they're personal, and they cut deep into places I've tried to hide for years. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt used or invisible in your own family, would you consider subscribing? Your support helps these stories reach others who need to know they're not alone. Sometimes just knowing someone else understands can make all the difference. I'm standing here in my small apartment in Chicago, looking out at the gray November sky, and I can still feel the weight of that moment when everything shattered. My name is Dorothy. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing everything. I wore that belief like a badge of honor, stitched into every fiber of my being. The apartment feels emptier now than it did when I first moved here after Harold died 12 years ago. Back then, the emptiness was grief. Now it's something different, something that tastes like disappointment mixed with the bitter coffee I drink every morning at 5:30 before the sun even considers rising. The walls are covered with photographs, a timeline of a life I thought I understood. There's Harold and me on our wedding day, both of us so young and hopeful. There's Timothy as a baby, wrapped in the blue blanket my mother crocheted before she died. There's Michelle at her high school graduation, already looking ready to escape. Each photo is a frozen moment of what I believed was love, devotion, family. Now I look at them and wonder how many of those smiles were real, how many of those embraces were genuine. My son Timothy called me on a Tuesday afternoon in September. I remember because Tuesdays were always my grocery days, and I was standing in the canned goods aisle at the Jewel Osco on Clark Street when my phone buzzed. His voice had that particular warmth he used when he wanted something, but I didn't notice it then. I was too busy feeling grateful that he'd called at all. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the store smelled like floor cleaner and the bakery's fresh bread. I can still picture exactly where I was standing, between the soup and the vegetables, my cart half full with the same items I bought every week. My heart lifted when I saw his name on the screen. Timothy didn't call often. Usually it was a quick text, a photo of the grandkids, a like on something I'd posted on Facebook. An actual phone call felt significant. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You've been through so much, especially since Dad passed. You deserve something special. How would you like an all-expenses-paid vacation? First class, all the way." My heart actually fluttered. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I stood there holding a can of green beans and my eyes filled with tears right there in the middle of the store. An elderly man pushing his cart past me looked concerned, but I just smiled and waved him off. Timothy was finally acknowledging everything I'd done. All those years of putting him through college while working double shifts at the hospital. All the money I'd lent him to start his business. All the times I'd watched his kids so he and Amanda could have their date nights and weekend getaways. "Timmy, sweetheart, that's so thoughtful," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "You don't have to do that." "I want to, Mom. You've earned it. I'll send you all the details soon. Start thinking about where you'd like to go." I walked through the rest of that shopping trip in a daze. I actually bought things I never buy, like fancy cheeses and a bottle of wine, feeling celebratory. That night, I sat in my armchair, the one Harold used to fall asleep in while watching the Bears games, and I let myself dream. Maybe Hawaii. I'd never seen the ocean, not really. Or maybe one of those European river cruises I'd seen advertised on television, gliding past castles and vineyards. I pulled out my old laptop and started researching. I bookmarked pages about Maui sunsets in Paris at Christmas. I imagined myself walking along a beach, feeling sand between my toes for the first time. I pictured sitting in a sidewalk cafe in Rome, sipping espresso and watching people go by. For 3 days, I lived in that beautiful fantasy. I told Carol about it, and even her skeptical expression couldn't dampen my excitement. I called Michelle, and though she'd seemed hesitant, I brushed it off as her usual wariness about Timothy. The details arrived via email 3 days later. My hands trembled as I opened the attachment on my old laptop, but as I read, something cold settled in my stomach. The vacation was watching his 5 children, ages 3 through 12, for 2 weeks while he and Amanda went to Bali. The email was professionally formatted, almost like a contract. It listed the children's schedules, dietary restrictions, medication times for the youngest who had asthma, and pick-up and drop-off times for various activities. At the bottom, in smaller print, it said, "We know this will be a wonderful bonding experience for you and the grandchildren. The doctor said more time with family would be good for your health." I read it 3 times. Each time, I felt the dream crumble a little more. The beaches faded. The vineyards disappeared. The fantasy dissolved into the harsh reality of what I actually was to my son: free childcare. Then I called him. "Timmy, honey, I think there's been some confusion. The email talks about watching the kids, but I thought you were planning a vacation for me." His laugh was easy, casual. "Mom, this is your vacation. Quality time with your grandchildren. Isn't that what you always say you want? Besides, you're always complaining about being lonely. Now you'll have the house full of life and laughter." The way he said it, so smooth and confident, made me doubt my own perception. Had I misunderstood? Was I being selfish for expecting an actual vacation? I thought about the last family dinner, where I'd mentioned how quiet my apartment was. I remembered saying something about missing the noise of children, but I'd meant visits, brief moments of connection, not 2 weeks of full-time childcare. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. He was right, wasn't he? I did say I wanted to see the grandchildren more. I did complain about the silence in my apartment. Maybe I was being ungrateful. Maybe this was a gift, just not the kind I'd expected. I swallowed my disappointment and heard myself say, "Of course, sweetheart. When do you need me?" That's how it started. That's how I found myself 2 weeks later, standing in Timothy's expansive house in Naperville, watching his SUV disappear down the tree-lined street, leaving me with 5 children who barely knew me and seemed to regard my presence with varying degrees of indifference and annoyance. The house was beautiful, I'll give them that. 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen with appliances I didn't know how to operate, and a backyard with a playset that probably cost more than my yearly rent. But beauty doesn't make a place feel like home, especially when you're there as unpaid labor. As I stood in the doorway watching them leave, Amanda had given me a quick hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "You're such a lifesaver, Dorothy," she'd said. "We really need this trip. Timothy's been so stressed with work." Then she'd handed me a 3-ring binder, color-coded and tabbed, with every detail of the children's lives organized into sections. "Everything you need is in here," she'd assured me. "You'll do great." The first morning, I woke up at 5:30 out of habit, made myself coffee, and sat at their kitchen island watching the sun rise over their perfectly manicured lawn. The quiet lasted until 6:15, when 3-year-old Sophie started crying for her mother. Her wails brought 9-year-old Marcus and 7-year-old twins Emma and Ethan thundering down the stairs. 12-year-old Olivia emerged last, earbuds in, barely acknowledging my cheerful good morning. Sophie's face was red and blotchy from crying, her blonde curls matted with sleep. "I want Mommy," she sobbed, reaching for me, but then pulling away when I tried to comfort her. She didn't know me well enough to accept consolation from me. To her, I was a stranger in her house, a poor substitute for the mother she wanted. "Mommy will be back soon, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. My knees cracked, a reminder that I wasn't built for this anymore. "How about we make some special pancakes for breakfast?" "I don't like pancakes," she wailed. "I want Dino nuggets." At 6:30 in the morning, chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs for breakfast. I glanced at the binder Amanda had left, frantically flipping through pages until I found the section on Sophie's preferences. There it was, in Amanda's neat handwriting. Sophie has strong food preferences. It's easier to just give her what she wants rather than fight about it. Dino nuggets are in the freezer, second drawer. I'd raised Timothy. How hard could 5 children be? But my son had been an easy child, quiet and bookish. These kids were different. They'd been raised with abundance, with choices, with parents who gave them everything except, apparently, discipline or basic manners. By noon that first day, I'd already cleaned up 3 spills, refereed 4 fights, and fielded a call from the school about Marcus disrupting class. Sophie refused to eat anything I made, screaming for chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, which I didn't know existed and certainly didn't have in the freezer. Marcus had looked at me with defiant eyes when I'd picked him up early from school. "You're not my real grandma," he'd said in the car. "You never come to my birthday parties." The accusation stung because it was partially true. I'd been invited, but Timothy had always scheduled them at inconvenient times, and when I'd mentioned it, he'd made me feel like I was being difficult. "We can't plan around everyone's schedule, Mom," he'd said. So I'd sent gifts and cards and told myself it was enough. I called Timothy that evening after finally getting all 5 children in bed. My feet ached, my back was screaming, and I had a headache that felt like it was splitting my skull in 2. "How's it going, Mom?" he asked, and I could hear tropical music in the background. The clink of glasses. "It's challenging," I admitted. "Sophie cries every time I try to put her down. Marcus is having trouble at school. I don't think I'm equipped for—" "You're doing great, Mom. Kids just need to adjust. You've got this. Listen, we're about to head to dinner, but hang in there, okay? Love you." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there in his kitchen, holding my phone, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I looked old. When had I gotten so old? My hair, which I'd always kept neatly styled, was falling out of its clip. My clothes, the nice slacks and blouse I'd worn to make a good impression, were stained with something that looked like grape juice. My eyes, my mother's eyes, stared back at me with a mixture of exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been the first flicker of realization, but I pushed it down. I'd made a commitment. I was Dorothy Chen, and Dorothy Chen didn't quit. Dorothy Chen had worked 3 jobs to put her son through Northwestern. Dorothy Chen had nursed her husband through cancer while never missing a day of work. Dorothy Chen could handle 5 children for 2 weeks. The days blurred together into an exhausting routine. Up at 5:30, make breakfast for 5 different pallets, pack 5 different lunches, drive the older kids to 3 different schools, take Sophie to preschool, rush back to clean the breakfast disaster, pick up Sophie, make lunch, monitor virtual learning for Emma, who'd stayed home with a cold, break up fights, change diapers, give medications, drive to piano lessons, drive to soccer practice, drive to tutoring, make dinner, supervise homework, run baths, read bedtime stories, collapse into bed around 11, only to wake up at 2 when Sophie had nightmares, at 4 when Marcus wet the bed, at 5:15 when Olivia's alarm went off for her morning run. Each task felt like climbing a mountain. Timothy's house had stairs, something my apartment didn't, and by the 3rd day my knees were swollen and painful. I'd forgotten Sophie's inhaler at home during a trip to the park and had to rush back, my heart pounding with fear that something terrible would happen. I'd mixed up the twins' backpacks and sent Emma to Ethan's after-school program, resulting in confused phone calls and a lecture from the program director about proper labeling. The twins were particularly challenging. They fought over everything: who sat where at the table, whose turn it was to choose the TV show, who got the blue cup versus the red one. Their arguments would escalate from words to pushing to full-on wrestling matches on the living room floor. When I tried to separate them, they'd turn on me with identical expressions of resentment. "Our mom lets us work it out ourselves," Emma informed me haughtily. She was 7, but had the attitude of a teenager. "Yeah, you're not supposed to interfere," Ethan added. "Dad says conflict resolution is a life skill." I wanted to tell them that conflict resolution didn't involve choking your sibling or pulling their hair, but I was too tired to argue. Besides, who was I to contradict their parents' parenting philosophy? I was just the grandmother, the free babysitter who apparently didn't know anything about raising children despite having successfully raised 2 of my own. The incident with Olivia on day 4 was particularly painful. I'd made dinner, a simple pasta with marinara sauce, something I thought any child would eat. The younger ones picked at it, complaining it wasn't like their moms, but they ate. Olivia took one look at her plate and pushed it away. "I can't eat this," she announced. "It's full of gluten and nightshades. Mom and I are on a clean eating plan." I stared at her, exhausted beyond words. "Sweetheart, there's nothing in the binder about special dietary needs for you." "That's because Mom trusts me to make my own food choices," she said, rolling her eyes. "Unlike some people, she respects my bodily autonomy." At 12 years old, she was throwing around terms like bodily autonomy to avoid eating dinner I'd spent an hour preparing. I thought about my own childhood, where you ate what was put in front of you, or you went hungry. But this was a different world, with different children, raised with different values. "What would you like instead?" I asked, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. "I'll make myself a smoothie," she said, already heading to the kitchen. She proceeded to use half the contents of the refrigerator, the expensive blender I was afraid to touch, and left a disaster of a mess before taking her smoothie to her room. I cleaned up after her, added it to the list of things I cleaned up after everyone, and wondered how I'd become a servant in my son's house. I lost 8 pounds that first week. I stopped bothering with makeup. My blood pressure medication ran out, and I didn't have time to get to the pharmacy. I called Timothy twice more, but both times I got voicemail. Amanda posted photos on social media, sunset dinners on the beach, couples massages, zip-lining through jungle canopies. In one photo, she wore a flower crown and held a cocktail with a tiny umbrella. The caption read, "Finally getting the rest we desperately needed. So grateful for family who step up." Family who step up. I stared at those words for a long time, sitting in the quiet of Timothy's study at 11 at night, the only time I had to myself. Is that what I was doing? Stepping up? Or was I being stepped on? I scrolled through the other photos. Timothy and Amanda looked radiant, tanned, relaxed. They looked like people without a care in the world. Meanwhile, I was in their beautiful home, surrounded by their beautiful things, taking care of their beautiful children, and I'd never felt more used in my life. The second week was worse. The initial novelty wore off, and the children's resentment at their parents' absence focused squarely on me. I wasn't their mother. I didn't know their routines, their preferences, their secret languages and inside jokes. Olivia spent hours locked in her room, emerging only to criticize my cooking or ask when her real parents were coming back. Marcus started acting out at school, resulting in 3 calls to come pick him up early. The twins fought constantly, a rolling battle that moved from room to room, destroying everything in its path. And Sophie, poor Sophie, cried every night for her mama until she exhausted herself into sleep. One night, around the 5th day of the second week, I sat with Sophie as she cried. Her little body shook with sobs, and nothing I did could comfort her. I sang lullabies my mother had sung to me. I rubbed her back. I offered her favorite stuffed animal, her special blanket, a cup of warm milk. Nothing worked. "Why did Mommy leave me?" she asked between hiccups, her small face turned up to mine with such genuine confusion and hurt that I felt my heart break. What could I say? That her mother needed a vacation from her? That was the truth, wasn't it? Amanda and Timothy had needed a break from their own children so badly that they'd manipulated me into providing it. "Mommy didn't leave you, sweetheart," I lied. "She just went on a trip. She'll be back soon." "But why couldn't I go?" Sophie's blue eyes, so much like Timothy's, searched my face for answers I couldn't give. "Sometimes grown-ups need to take trips by themselves," I said, but even as I said it, I wondered why that was acceptable. Why was it okay for Timothy to leave his children for 2 weeks in paradise while I was expected to sacrifice everything, always? Finally, after what felt like hours, Sophie fell asleep in my arms. I sat there in the rocking chair in her room, the one I'd given Amanda as a baby shower gift years ago, holding this small child who barely knew me. The room was decorated in soft pinks and purples, everything carefully coordinated and expensive. Photos of Sophie with her parents lined the dresser, all perfect moments captured and framed. But where were the grandparents in these photos? Where was I? I realized with a start that I wasn't in any of them. Not because I'd been cropped out, but because I'd never been there for those moments. Birthday parties I couldn't attend because of inconvenient timing. First days of school I didn't know about until after the fact. Dance recitals and soccer games that happened without me even knowing they existed. Timothy had systematically kept me at a distance from his children's lives, only calling me in when he needed something. Free babysitting, emergency childcare, a convenient solution to his problems. And I'd let him do it, telling myself that any time with the grandchildren was better than no time at all. But Sophie didn't know me. None of them really knew me. To them, I was a stranger who occasionally appeared with gifts and awkward hugs. I was Grandma Dorothy, the woman who sent cards with money inside but didn't know their favorite colors or their best friends' names or what they wanted to be when they grew up. The weight of that realization settled on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I'd failed these children, but not in the way Timothy would claim. I'd failed them by allowing their father to keep me at arm's length, by not demanding to be a real presence in their lives, by accepting whatever scraps of affection and access he deigned to give me. I found myself crying too, usually in the shower where no one could hear me. I'd spent my whole life taking care of people. First, my younger siblings after my mother died when I was 16. Then Harold, who was a good man but helpless when it came to domestic matters. Then Timothy, my miracle baby who'd come after 3 miscarriages. I'd poured everything into him. Everything. My dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner had evaporated when he was born. The small inheritance from my grandmother, money I'd hoped to save for retirement, had funded his business degree. My weekends, which I'd fantasized about filling with book clubs and pottery classes, had been devoted to watching his children so he could invest in his marriage. And this was my reward: 2 weeks of unpaid labor disguised as a gift. On Thursday of the second week, I was folding laundry, mountains of tiny clothes that seemed to multiply overnight, when my phone rang. It was my neighbor Carol from Chicago, calling to check on me. "How's the fancy vacation?" she asked, and I could hear the skepticism in her voice. Carol was 72, sharp as a tack, and didn't suffer fools. We'd been neighbors for 6 years, ever since she'd moved into the apartment across the hall after her divorce. She'd been through her own family drama, which she'd shared with me over countless cups of tea. Her ex-husband had been a charming man who'd slowly isolated her from friends and family, controlled their finances, and made her doubt her own perceptions of reality. It had taken her 50 years to leave him, 50 years to recognize the patterns of manipulation. She'd told me her story one winter evening, both of us wrapped in blankets, drinking chamomile tea, and I'd listened with sympathy, never imagining I'd see parallels in my own life. "It's fine," I lied, but my voice cracked on the word. "Dorothy, tell me the truth." And suddenly, it all came spilling out. The deception, the exhaustion, the feeling of being used, the realization that my son had manipulated me, had lied to me, had taken advantage of my love and my loneliness to get free childcare. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know what DARVO is?" "What?" "DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It's a manipulation tactic. When someone does something wrong, they deny it, attack you for bringing it up, and then flip it so they're the victim and you're the bad guy." Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like what Timothy had done. He denied that this was anything but a gift. He'd attacked my concerns by implying I was ungrateful. And he'd made himself the victim, the stressed-out father who desperately needed a break, while painting me as the selfish mother who couldn't even give him 2 weeks of help. "There's something else you should know," Carol continued. "I've been reading about this. During the pandemic, reports of elder abuse increased dramatically. They're saying now it's about 1 in 5 seniors who experience some form of financial or emotional exploitation, usually by family members, usually by their own children. The words hit me like ice water. Elder abuse. Was that what this was? I'd never thought of myself as someone who could be abused. I was strong, independent, capable. I'd survived so much. But as Carol talked, describing the patterns of manipulation, isolation, financial exploitation, and emotional control, I recognized Timothy's behavior in every category. I felt something shift inside me. Not quite anger yet, but awareness. For the first time, I allowed myself to see the pattern. The pattern that had been there all along, if I'd been willing to look. After Harold died, Timothy had convinced me to sell our house in Lincoln Park. Too much space for one person, Mom. Too many memories. Let me help you find something smaller. He'd found me the apartment, handled all the paperwork. I hadn't questioned why the sale price seemed low, or where exactly all that money had gone. He'd said it was invested, that he was managing it for me. I'd trusted him. When he'd started his consulting business 5 years ago, he'd needed a loan. $20,000. Just until I get established, Mom. I'll pay you back with interest. I'd given it to him from my savings, money I'd set aside for emergencies. He'd never paid back a cent, and when I'd gently mentioned it once, he'd gotten defensive. After everything you and Dad spent on my education, you're really going to nickel and dime me? I thought family was supposed to support each other. There were the small favors that were never small. The times he'd needed to borrow my car and returned it with an empty tank and a new dent. The emergency babysitting that became regular babysitting. The family dinners where I was expected to cook for 10 people and clean up afterward while everyone else relaxed. The Mother's Days where they took me out to brunch and I ended up paying because Timothy had forgotten his wallet. I'd told myself it was normal. That's what families did. They helped each other, but help was supposed to go both ways, wasn't it? When had Timothy ever helped me? I thanked Carol and hung up. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I started snooping. I went through the papers in Timothy's home office, the one he'd told me was off limits. The office was immaculate, like everything else in this house. A mahogany desk that probably cost more than my monthly rent, leather chairs, shelves lined with books that looked like they'd never been opened, chosen for their appearance rather than their content. Degrees and awards hung on the walls in expensive frames. This was Timothy's shrine to his own success, his proof that he'd made it. I started with the file cabinet. It wasn't even locked. Why would it be? Who would dare invade Timothy's privacy? His trusting, grateful mother certainly wouldn't, except that's exactly what I was doing. And with each folder I opened, my hands shook less and my resolve strengthened more. I found bank statements showing accounts with 6 figures, investment portfolios worth hundreds of thousands, property deeds for a vacation home in Door County I didn't know existed, retirement accounts that were fully funded, college savings accounts for all 5 children, each one holding more money than I'd seen in my entire life. My son, who claimed he was barely scraping by, who'd convinced me to keep lending him money, who'd made me feel guilty for asking for repayment, was wealthy. Genuinely wealthy. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, each document, each statement, each damning piece of evidence. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, methodical. I was documenting a crime, I realized. My own son's crime against me. And there, in a folder labeled Mom, I found copies of the paperwork from the sale of my house. The sale price had been fair, nearly $400,000, but the documents showing where that money went revealed the truth. Timothy had invested it all right, in his own name, in accounts I had no access to. My inheritance, my security, my future, he'd stolen it. Legally, technically, because I'd signed the papers giving him power of attorney over my finances. He'd told me it was just a precaution in case anything happened to me. I'd trusted him. My hands shook as I held the papers. I read them over and over, trying to find some other explanation, some innocent reason why my money was in his accounts. But there was none. The paperwork was clear. He'd taken everything and made it his. I thought about my small apartment, the one I could barely afford on my Social Security. I thought about the times I'd skipped medications because they were too expensive. I thought about the winter coat I'd been wearing for 8 years because I couldn't justify buying a new one. All while Timothy lived in this mansion, took expensive vacations, and bought his children everything they wanted. I remembered last winter, when my heat had gone out and it took 3 days for the landlord to fix it. I'd called Timothy, asking if I could stay with them for just those few nights. He'd said they were too busy, that it wasn't a good time, that maybe I should check into a hotel. A hotel? With what money? The money he'd stolen from me? I remembered when I needed dental work 2 years ago. A root canal that my insurance wouldn't fully cover. I'd asked Timothy if I could borrow $500, promising to pay him back in installments. He'd made me feel like I was asking for a kidney. "Mom, I've got 5 kids to support," he'd said. "Money is tight right now." Money was tight, while he had hundreds of thousands in investment accounts. I remembered the time my car broke down and needed $1,000 in repairs. I'd called Timothy in tears, not asking for money but just needing someone to talk to, someone to help me figure out what to do. He'd listened for 5 minutes before cutting me off. "Mom, I can't deal with this right now. I'm at work. Figure it out." I'd taken out a credit card with a 23% interest rate to pay for those repairs. I was still paying it off. Every moment of financial stress, every time I'd gone without, every time I'd sacrificed and struggled, he'd known. He'd known that he had my money. Money that could have paid for my heat, my dental work, my car repairs. Money that could have let me live with dignity and security instead of constant worry and deprivation. I sat in his expensive leather desk chair, in his beautiful home office with its built-in bookshelves and views of the garden, and I felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, just crack, like ice on a lake at the end of winter, that first split that warns of the collapse to come. That night, after the children were finally asleep, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, really looked at myself for the first time in weeks. My face was drawn, new lines etched around my eyes and mouth. My skin had that grayish tint that comes from stress and poor sleep. My hands, when I held them up, trembled slightly. I looked like someone who'd been worked too hard for too long. I looked like someone who'd been used up and thrown away. I thought about my mother, who died at 53, worn out from a lifetime of putting everyone else first. I thought about Harold, who'd told me on his deathbed to take care of myself, to not spend my remaining years in service to everyone else's dreams. I thought about the young Dorothy who'd wanted to be a nurse practitioner, who'd had ambitions and hopes and plans that had nothing to do with sacrificing herself. When had I stopped mattering? When had my value become solely about what I could provide for others? I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of the guest room, listening to the house settle around me, and I made a decision. Not yet fully formed, but growing. Something had to change. I couldn't do this anymore. I wouldn't. The next morning was Friday. Timothy and Amanda were due back Sunday night. I had 2.5 days left. I got up, made breakfast, got the kids ready for school, went through all the motions. But something was different. I was different. I moved through the day like an observer, watching myself perform this role I'd been assigned without my consent. Carol called again that afternoon. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said. "You know what you need to do, don't you?" "What?" "You need to document everything, every conversation, every broken promise, every manipulation. You need proof, Dorothy. Because when you finally stand up to him, he's going to deny it all. He's going to make you think you're crazy, that you're remembering wrong, that you're being ungrateful. You need evidence." She was right. I spent that afternoon, while Sophie napped and the older kids were at school, going through my phone. I recovered old texts where Timothy had promised to pay me back, emails where he'd asked for small loans that were never small and never loans. I took photos of the documents in his office, careful to put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I wrote down dates and amounts, building a timeline of his financial exploitation. The documentation process was meticulous and painful. Each email, each text message was another small betrayal. I found messages where I'd asked if he needed help, and he'd responded with requests for money. I found conversations where I'd expressed concern about my finances, and he'd reassured me that my money was safe and growing. Growing in his accounts, not mine. But it wasn't just the money. That was somehow the least of it. It was the emotional manipulation, the way he'd weaponized my love for him, my desire to be a good mother, my fear of being alone. He knew exactly which buttons to push, which guilt to invoke, which dreams to dangle just out of reach. Saturday brought an unexpected complication. Timothy's younger sister, my daughter Michelle, called. Michelle lived in Seattle, worked in tech, and had always been the practical one. We weren't close, not the way I'd hoped we'd be. She'd moved across the country right after college and kept me at arm's length, calling dutifully on holidays, but never sharing much of her life. "Mom, I heard you're watching Tim's kids," she said, her tone neutral. Yes, he and Amanda needed a vacation. A vacation, she laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Mom, do you know where they actually are?" "Bali," he told me. "Did he tell you it's a business trip, that his company is paying for it, that he's been writing off your help as childcare expenses for tax purposes while claiming he pays you?" The world tilted. What? I saw his tax returns last year. We were talking about investments, and he was bragging about his deductions. He's been claiming he pays you for childcare, Mom. Thousands of dollars a year, money you've never seen. I couldn't speak. The enormity of the betrayal was too large to process. "I'm sorry," Michelle said, and for the first time in years, she sounded like my daughter, not a distant stranger. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't think you'd believe me. You always defended him." She was right. I had always defended him. Timothy was my miracle baby, my success story, my proof that I'd done something right in this world. How could I admit that he'd turned into someone capable of this level of deception? "Michelle," I said slowly, "why did you really move to Seattle?" There was a long pause. "You want the truth? Please." I couldn't stand watching him use you. After Dad died, he swooped in and took over everything. Your finances, your decisions, your life. And you let him because you were grieving and you thought he was helping. But I saw what he was doing, Mom. I saw him taking your money, your power, your independence. And every time I tried to say something, you'd defend him. You'd say I was jealous or that I didn't understand family loyalty. So I left. I couldn't watch it anymore. The revelation was devastating. I'd lost my daughter because I'd been blind to my son's manipulation. Michelle hadn't abandoned me out of indifference. She'd left to protect herself from the pain of watching me be exploited. After I hung up with Michelle, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The children were in the family room, fighting over the remote control, their voices shrill and demanding. I should have gone in there. I should have mediated, distracted, corrected. But I just sat there, feeling the full weight of my exhaustion, my disappointment, my rage. The rage was new. I'd been sad, hurt, confused. But rage, that was different. Rage was energizing. Rage was clarity. I picked up my phone and did something impulsive. I called the airline Timothy had booked his tickets through. It took some searching through his email, which I accessed using the password he'd foolishly shared with me years ago. But I found the confirmation. I told them I was his assistant, that there was a family emergency, that I needed to leave him an urgent message. "He'll get it when they land tomorrow," the customer service rep said. "We can't contact him in flight." "That's fine," I said. "Please tell him his mother called and that he needs to call her immediately." I spent the rest of that day in a strange state of calm. I made dinner, helped with homework, ran baths, read bedtime stories. But I was planning. For the first time in my life, I was planning something for myself, something that would require courage I wasn't sure I had. Sunday morning, I woke up early as always, but instead of making breakfast, I called Carol. "I need your help," I said. "Can you come here?" She arrived 2 hours later, having taken the train from Chicago. I'd told the kids their grandmother's friend was visiting, and they barely looked up from their screens. Carol and I sat in the kitchen, and I showed her everything I'd found. The bank statements, the investment accounts, the property deeds, the tax returns Michelle had mentioned. "This is fraud," Carol said flatly. "He's been stealing from you, Dorothy, and the tax thing, that's actually illegal. You could report him." "I don't want to send my son to prison," I said automatically. "No, but you could use this as leverage, to get your money back, to make him stop." We spent the afternoon preparing. Carol helped me draft an email to Timothy, laying out everything I knew, including dollar amounts and dates. We attached copies of all the documents. "Make it factual," Carol advised. "No emotions, no accusations, just facts and consequences. That's what makes it powerful." So I wrote it like a business letter, cold and clinical. I listed every loan he'd never repaid with dates and amounts. I documented the sale of my house and where the money had gone. I included screenshots of his tax returns showing the fraudulent childcare deductions. I laid out exactly how much he owed me, calculated with interest. And at the end, I wrote, "When you get home tonight, we need to have a conversation, a real one. No more lies, no more manipulation. If you're not willing to make this right, I will be forced to take other steps, including reporting the tax fraud to the IRS." Before I hit send, I read it through one more time. Carol read it over my shoulder. "This is good, Dorothy," she said. "This is clear and factual and leaves no room for him to wiggle out." "It feels like I'm declaring war on my own son," I said quietly. "No," Carol said firmly. "He declared war on you years ago. You're just finally defending yourself." I sent it at 4 p.m. while the children were having their snack. My hands shook as I hit send, but I did it. Then Carol and I waited. Timothy and Amanda walked through the door at 8 that night, tan and relaxed, loaded down with luggage and duty-free shopping bags. The kids mobbed them, and there was chaos for several minutes while everyone hugged and talked over each other. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching, waiting. Finally, Timothy looked at me. His smile was broad, genuine-looking. "Mom, how was your vacation with the kids?" "We need to talk," I said, alone. Something flickered in his eyes. He'd seen the email. He pulled out his phone, glanced at it, and his expression changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. "Amanda, can you handle bedtime?" he asked. "Mom and I need to catch up." We went into his office. He closed the door and turned to face me, and I saw a stranger. Not my son, not the little boy I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers and cheered at graduation. A stranger who looked at me like I was an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. "Mom, I can explain." "No," I said, and my voice was steady, strong. "You can't explain. You can apologize. You can make restitution, but you can't explain away years of theft and manipulation." He tried anyway. The transformation was remarkable to watch. First came the denial. "Those numbers are wrong. You're misunderstanding the paperwork. It's complicated financial stuff, Mom. You never were good with money." There it was. The subtle dig, the implication that I was too simple to understand. But I'd spent 2 days reviewing those documents with Carol, who'd been a financial analyst before she retired. I knew exactly what I was looking at. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You took $400,000 from the sale of my house and put it in accounts in your name only. You claimed on your taxes that you paid me for childcare when you never paid me a cent. You borrowed $20,000 from me 5 years ago and never repaid it. Shall I continue?" His jaw tightened. Denial wasn't working, so he shifted to attack. "You went through my private papers. You invaded my privacy? I can't believe you'd betray my trust like that. After I opened my home to you, let you stay here with my children, This is how you repay me? Darvo. Exactly like Carol had predicted. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. He was trying to make this about my snooping instead of his stealing. Your trust, I repeated. You want to talk about trust, Timothy? I trusted you with my finances. I trusted you when you said you'd invest my money safely. I trusted you when you asked to borrow money and promised to pay it back. I trusted you when you said this trip was a gift for me. You violated my trust at every turn for years. His face flushed red. I was managing your money, keeping it safe, investing it so you'd have something for retirement. You should be thanking me, not accusing me of theft. If you were managing it for me, why is it in your accounts? Why do I have no access to it? Why didn't I know about the vacation home in Door County? Why didn't you use that money to help me when my heat went out last winter and I spent 3 days in a freezing apartment? He had no answer for that. His mouth opened and closed, and I watched him search for an angle, a way to spin this. But I'd blocked all his exits with facts and evidence. He tried anyway. He denied the amounts were as high as I claimed. He attacked me for snooping, for betraying his trust by going through his private papers. He tried to reverse it, painting himself as the victim of my suspicious nature, my ingratitude, my inability to understand how modern finances worked. But I'd been prepared for this. Carol had warned me. I stood firm. You have 2 choices, I said. You can return my money, all of it, with interest. You can start treating me with respect, not as free labor. And you can file amended tax returns. Or I can report you to the IRS, pursue legal action for the money, and never speak to you again. You wouldn't do that, he said. I'm your son. You're my son who's been stealing from me for years. You're my son who lied to me, manipulated me, used me. Being my son doesn't give you the right to abuse me. We stared at each other across his expensive desk. I saw him calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to talk his way out of this, but I'd blocked all his exits. Fine, he finally said, his voice cold. I'll transfer the money, but don't expect me to be happy about it. Don't expect us to stay close after this. Timothy, I said softly, we haven't been close for years. I just didn't want to see it. I left that night. Carol had already called an Uber. I packed my small suitcase, walked out of that beautiful house, and didn't look back. The children were already in bed. I didn't say goodbye. Maybe that made me a bad grandmother, but I couldn't face them. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. The days that followed were strange. I waited for guilt, but it didn't come. What came instead was a peculiar lightness, like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten it was there, and now it was gone. Timothy did transfer the money, $400,000, plus what he calculated as interest. It showed up in my account 3 days after I got home. He didn't call. I didn't call him. Michelle did call, though. I heard what happened, she said. Mom, I'm proud of you. You are? Yeah, I pulled away from Tim years ago because of stuff like this. I just couldn't watch him manipulate you anymore, and I couldn't say anything because you always defended him. But now, maybe we can actually have a relationship. It was a tentative offer, but a genuine one. We started talking regularly, really talking. She told me about her life, her struggles, her triumphs. I told her about mine. We were building something new, something that felt more real than anything I'd had with Timothy. But the story wasn't over. I thought it was. I thought standing up to Timothy was my ending, my liberation. I was wrong. Thanksgiving was coming. I'd assumed I wouldn't be invited to Timothy's celebration, and I'd made peace with that. Michelle was flying in, and we were going to have a quiet dinner, just the 2 of us. But then Timothy called. Mom, he said, and his voice was different, warm again, friendly. I know things have been rough between us, but it's Thanksgiving. Family should be together. Amanda and I want you to come. I was skeptical, but part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my son loved me, wanted this to be real. Are you sure? Absolutely. We've all missed you. The kids ask about you. Let's start fresh. I talked it over with Michelle. She was doubtful. "Mom, I don't trust him. This feels like a setup." But I wanted to believe in redemption. I wanted to believe people could change. So I said yes. I should have listened to Michelle. Thanksgiving at Timothy's was a production. Amanda had outdone herself with decorations and a menu that could have come from a magazine. The whole family was there. Timothy, Amanda, the 5 kids, Amanda's parents, and her sister with her family. 20 people crowded around a table that groaned under the weight of turkey and sides and pies. I'd brought a dish, my mother's cranberry sauce recipe, and helped in the kitchen. Everyone was polite, friendly even. But there was something off, a performance quality to it all. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until dinner started. Timothy stood up to give a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he began. "Family is everything, and I want to particularly thank my mother, who's taught us all so much about the importance of family, about sacrifice and unconditional love." People murmured agreement. I smiled, confused but touched. "Mom's been through a lot this year," Timothy continued. "She's been dealing with some health issues, some confusion. We've all been worried about her." Confusion? I felt a chill run down my spine. "But we want her to know that we're here for her, no matter what. Even when she's struggling with her memory, with understanding how finances work, with her mental clarity. We love her, and we'll take care of her." He sat down to light applause. I sat there, frozen, as the conversation moved on. What had just happened? He'd just publicly implied I was senile, that I couldn't understand finances, that I was confused and struggling. He was laying groundwork. I realized it with sick certainty. He was creating a narrative where I was an unreliable narrator of my own life, someone whose accusations couldn't be trusted because I was old and confused. He was turning my family against me before I even had a chance to tell them what he'd done. I made it through dinner on autopilot. When it was over, I pulled Timothy aside. "What was that?" I demanded. "That speech?" He looked at me with false concern. "Mom, I'm just worried about you. You're not yourself lately. All these accusations demanding money back that I already paid you for childcare, claiming I stole from you. I think maybe you need to see someone, a doctor. It could be early dementia." I stared at him, and I finally saw him clearly. He wasn't going to change. The money transfer hadn't been an admission of guilt. It had been a strategic retreat, buying time while he planned his next move. This was his next move: discredit me before I could expose him. "I am not confused," I said clearly. "I am not sick, and everyone here is going to know the truth." I walked back into the dining room, where people were having coffee and pie. My heart was pounding, but I felt calm, eerily calm. "I have something to say," I announced. The room fell silent, and then I told them everything. I pulled out my phone, which I'd started using to record conversations with Timothy. I played back the recordings from our confrontation in his office, where he'd admitted to taking my money, where he'd tried to manipulate me into backing down. I showed them the bank statements I'd photographed, the tax returns Michelle had provided. I laid it all out, methodically, calmly. The room was silent when I finished. Amanda's face was white. Her parents looked stunned. Timothy just sat there, his face a mask. "That's not," he started, but Amanda cut him off. "Is it true?" she asked him. "Tim, is this true?" He tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. His father-in-law, a retired accountant, asked to see the tax documents. When he did, his expression hardened. "You filed false returns," he said. "You claimed you paid your mother for childcare when you didn't. That's tax fraud." The dinner broke up shortly after that. People left quietly, awkwardly. Timothy's family, Amanda's family. They all saw him for what he was. The golden boy, the successful businessman, the devoted father, was a fraud and a thief. I left, too, Michelle beside me. As we drove away, I looked back at that house one last time. The lights were still on, bright and cheerful, but I knew what lay behind them now. The consequences came swiftly. Amanda's father, appalled by the tax fraud, threatened to report Timothy if he didn't file amended returns and pay the back taxes and penalties. It cost Timothy nearly $50,000. Amanda, humiliated in front of her family, demanded couples counseling and financial transparency. The kids, who'd overheard enough to know something bad had happened, started acting out at school. Timothy's perfect life, built on lies and exploitation, was crumbling. I felt no satisfaction in it. He was still my son, but I felt free of him, free of the obligation to protect him from consequences he'd earned. The real transformation, though, came in the weeks after Thanksgiving. I was alone in my apartment, really alone for the first time. No demands on my time, no one needing anything from me. It should have felt empty. Instead, it felt like possibility. I started small. I joined a book club at the local library, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. The first meeting was awkward. I was the oldest one there and felt out of place. The room smelled like old books and coffee, and everyone seemed to know each other already. They were discussing a novel I'd barely had time to read, throwing around literary terms I didn't know. I almost left at the break. Made it as far as the door before a woman about my age touched my arm. "First time?" she asked. I nodded, embarrassed. "I was terrified my first time too," she said. "Stayed silent the whole meeting, but I came back and it got easier. I'm Diane, by the way." "Dorothy." "Well, Dorothy, I hope you'll come back next week. We need more perspectives in here. It's getting to be an echo chamber." So I went back, and the second meeting was better. I shared an opinion about the book we'd read, and people listened. Really listened. Not just politely waiting for their turn to talk, but actually considering what I said. Diane nodded enthusiastically. Another woman wrote something down. By the third meeting, I felt like I belonged. We'd moved on to a different book, one that hit closer to home. The book we were reading was about a woman who'd left her abusive marriage at 70 and started a new life. The parallels weren't lost on me. When it was my turn to share, I found myself talking not just about the book, but about my own experience. The room was quiet as I spoke. When I finished, a younger woman reached across and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for sharing that," she said. "My grandmother is going through something similar with my uncle. I'm going to tell her your story. Maybe it'll help her find the courage to stand up to him." After the meeting, 3 different people asked if I wanted to get coffee. We went to the diner next door, ordered pie and decaf, and talked for 2 hours. About books, yes, but also about life, about families and regrets and second chances, about how it's never too late to choose yourself. These people didn't want anything from me except my company and conversation. They laughed at my jokes, they asked my opinion, and valued my answers. They invited me to other things. A movie night, a trip to see a play, a pottery class someone was organizing. I said yes to all of it. Then I did something bigger. I went to the community college and enrolled in a nursing refresher course. I'd let my license lapse decades ago, but I still remembered the thrill of helping people, of using my skills. The advisor looked at my transcripts from 40 years ago and smiled. "You were a good student," she said. "I think you'll do fine." I was terrified that first day of class. I was 68 years old, sitting among students young enough to be my grandchildren. But the instructor, a woman in her 50s, gave me a nod of encouragement. And when we started going over basic anatomy, muscle memory kicked in. I remembered. I still knew this. Carol and I started a support group for older adults dealing with family financial abuse. We met once a week at the senior center, and I was amazed how many people showed up. 15 at the first meeting, 20 at the second, 30 at the third, all with stories like mine, some worse. Children who'd stolen inheritance, grandchildren who'd manipulated savings, spouses who'd hidden assets. We shared strategies, legal resources, emotional support. I told my story over and over, and each time it hurt a little less. There was Margaret, whose daughter had taken power of attorney and sold her house out from under her, leaving her homeless at 82. There was Robert, whose son had emptied his retirement account to fund a business that never existed. There was Linda, whose entire family had isolated her after she questioned her grandson's constant requests for money. We cried together, we raged together, we celebrated small victories together. When Margaret got her house back through legal action, we brought champagne to the meeting. When Robert's son was arrested for fraud, we held Robert as he grieved the son he'd loved and the criminal that son had become. We became a family of sorts, bound not by blood, but by shared pain and shared determination to heal and to help others heal. I became a volunteer at a legal aid clinic, helping other seniors navigate financial abuse cases. I couldn't practice law, but I could listen, could share what I'd learned, could hold someone's hand while they gathered the courage to confront their own family members. It was meaningful work, the kind that made me feel like I was making a difference. Michelle came to visit for Christmas. Just her, no extended family, no performance. We spent Christmas Eve making cookies from recipes our mother had used. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, like home, like memories of better times. We rolled dough and cut shapes and told stories about our mother, about our childhood, about the people we used to be. "Do you remember the Christmas Dad got snowed in at the hospital?" Michelle asked, laughing. "Mom was so mad, but we had the best time, just the three of us. We made a fort out of couch cushions and slept in the living room so we could see the tree lights." I remembered. "You were 7, I think." "Best Christmas ever," she said softly. We talked about our childhoods, about mistakes we'd both made, about regrets and hopes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. No performances, no pretenses, just a mother and daughter finally connecting after years of distance. "I wish I'd stood up to Tim sooner," she admitted. "I wish I'd helped you see what was happening." "I wouldn't have listened," I said honestly. "I needed to see it myself." She nodded. "Are you happy, Mom?" I thought about it. Was I happy? I was alone more than I'd ever been. I saw my son maybe once every few months, and those visits were strained and formal. I didn't have the big family gatherings I'd once imagined filling my golden years. But I had peace. I had purpose. I had control over my own life for the first time in decades. I had money in the bank that was mine, that I could spend on myself without guilt. I had plans and dreams and possibilities. I had people who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am. For the first time in a very long time, I'm truly happy." Spring brought unexpected developments. Timothy showed up at my door unannounced. I almost didn't let him in. But curiosity won out. He looked different. Older, tired. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" We sat in my small living room, and he looked around at my modest apartment with something that might have been shame. "Amanda and I are separating," he said. "She can't forgive me for what I did to you. Her parents cut us off financially. The business is struggling. Everything's falling apart." I waited. I'd learned the power of silence. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, what I did, how wrong it was. You were just trying to be a good mother, and I exploited that." It was the apology I'd wanted for months. But hearing it now, I realized it didn't change anything. It didn't undo the years of manipulation. It didn't erase the betrayal. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I appreciate it. But I need you to understand something. I love you. You're my son, and I'll always love you. But I can't trust you. Not anymore. And I can't let you back into my life the way you were before." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand." "I hope you figure things out," I said. "I hope you get help. I hope you become the man I always believed you could be. But I can't help you do that. You have to do it yourself." He left, and I felt sad, but not guilty. I'd set a boundary, and I'd kept it. That was growth. Summer arrived, and with it, a surprise. I got my nursing license reinstated and took a part-time job at a community health clinic. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. I was helping people, using skills I'd thought were lost forever. My coworkers, mostly younger, treated me with respect. They valued my experience, my steady hands, my calm in crisis. I made new friends. Real friends, not people who wanted something from me. Women and men who invited me to movies and dinners and didn't expect me to pay or babysit or do them favors. Relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I started traveling, small trips at first. A long weekend in Nashville, a week in Santa Fe. Then, emboldened, I booked a cruise to Alaska. The real vacation I'd been promised and denied. I went alone, but I wasn't lonely. I met people, saw glaciers, watched whales breach. I stood on the deck at midnight watching the northern lights dance across the sky, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of it all. And from the realization that I'd almost missed this. I'd almost let Timothy's manipulation keep me from ever experiencing moments like this. On the last night of the cruise, I sat in the ship's lounge with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the water. A woman about my age sat down next to me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "Magnificent," I agreed. "Is this your first cruise?" "First time doing anything like this," I admitted. "I spent most of my life taking care of other people. This is my first time taking care of myself." She smiled. "Me too. My husband died 2 years ago. I spent 40 years making his life comfortable. Now I'm learning what makes me comfortable." We talked for hours about family expectations and sacrifices and the price of always putting others first, about reclaiming our lives, about the freedom and fear of starting over in our 60s. We exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch, and actually did. When I got back to Chicago, I felt different. Not just rested, though I was. Not just happy, though I was that too. I felt whole. Like all the broken pieces of myself that I'd given away over the years had somehow reassembled into someone new. Someone stronger. Fall brought my 69th birthday. Michelle flew in and we had dinner at a nice restaurant. No big party, no family drama, just the two of us, celebrating quietly. She gave me a gift, a photo album she'd put together, pictures of me through the years, young Dorothy holding baby Timothy, middle-aged Dorothy at Harold's side, recent Dorothy at my nursing job, at the book club, on the cruise. The progression was clear, the before and after. "You look different now," Michelle said, lighter. She was right. I'd lost that haunted look, that exhaustion that had settled into my bones. I looked like someone who was living, not just surviving. Timothy sent a card. Nothing fancy, just a simple, "Happy birthday, Mom." I appreciated the gesture but didn't feel compelled to respond immediately. Our relationship was still fractured, maybe permanently. He'd started therapy, according to Michelle, who still occasionally talked to him. He was trying to rebuild his life, to be better. I hoped he succeeded. But it wasn't my responsibility to help him anymore. Winter came again, and with it, reflection. I'd been thinking a lot about enablers, about the people who'd watched Timothy manipulate me and said nothing. Amanda's parents, who'd seen the expensive vacations while I lived modestly. Timothy's friends, who'd known he borrowed money from me constantly. Even Michelle, who'd pulled away rather than confront him. I understood the impulse. Confronting abuse, even when it's not happening to you, is hard. It's easier to look away, to tell yourself it's not your business, to hope someone else will step in. But silence enables abuse to continue. Silence tells the abuser that what they're doing is acceptable. Silence tells the victim that no one cares enough to help. I started speaking about this at the support group, at the legal aid clinic. I talked about the importance of speaking up when you see elder abuse, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. I encouraged people to be the voice for those who'd been silenced by manipulation and gaslighting. The response was overwhelming. People shared stories of times they'd seen abuse and stayed quiet, carrying guilt for years. Others shared times they'd spoken up and been dismissed or attacked. But we all agreed. The silence had to end. I became something of an advocate. Small scale, nothing grandiose. I gave talks at senior centers about recognizing financial abuse. I wrote articles for local papers about family exploitation. I testified at city council meetings about the need for better protections for older adults. It felt right, using my experience to help others. Now, as I sit here in my apartment on a cold January evening, I'm preparing for another semester of classes. I'm taking a psychology course, wanting to understand the dynamics of abuse better. I'm planning another trip, maybe Europe this time. I'm meeting Carol for coffee tomorrow, and Michelle is calling this weekend. My life is full, but it's full of things I choose. Relationships I nurture because I want to, not because I feel obligated. Work that fulfills me. Hobbies that bring me joy. I have boundaries now, firm ones, and I enforce them without guilt. Do I miss the fantasy of the big, happy family? Sometimes. But I don't miss the reality of what that family was. A one-way street where I gave everything and received only crumbs. Timothy and I have reached a fragile equilibrium. We see each other occasionally, always in public places, always with clear time limits. He's respectful now, careful. Whether it's genuine growth or strategic self-preservation, I don't know. Maybe both. I'm cordial, but cautious. I don't lend him money. I don't babysit. I don't make excuses for him. The grandchildren are growing up. Olivia is 16 now, starting to ask questions about why Grandma isn't around more. I've been honest with her, age appropriately. I've told her that sometimes, even in families, people hurt each other. That love doesn't mean accepting abuse, that you can love someone and still need distance from them. She's old enough to understand, I think. Old enough to start forming her own opinions about her father's choices. What I've learned, what I want to share with anyone listening, is this. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Never too late to set boundaries, to demand respect, to walk away from relationships that diminish you. Yes, it's hard. Yes, you'll feel guilty. Yes, people will try to make you the villain for standing up for yourself. But you are worth defending. Your peace is worth protecting. Your remaining years are too precious to spend them being used and discarded by people who should cherish you. I think about the woman I was 2 years ago, standing in Timothy's kitchen, tears streaming down my face, wondering how I'd become so foolish. I want to go back and tell her, you're not foolish, you're loving and trusting, and those are beautiful qualities. They were exploited, but that's not your fault. It's time to use those qualities on yourself now. Time to love and trust yourself enough to demand better. The system isn't set up to protect people like us. Elder abuse is underreported, underprosecuted, often dismissed as family matters. The law is slow and complicated. Getting justice is hard. Getting your money back is harder. Getting your dignity restored is sometimes impossible. But you can still win. Not by destroying your abuser, but by freeing yourself. By recognizing the patterns, gathering evidence, setting boundaries, and sticking to them. By building a life that doesn't depend on the approval or presence of people who've shown you they don't value you. And please, if you see someone being abused, speak up. Don't be an enabler through your silence. Don't assume someone else will intervene. Don't tell yourself it's not your business. That silence, that complicity, it allows abuse to flourish. Be the person you needed when you were suffering. Be the voice that says, I see what's happening, and it's not okay. Be the hand that reaches out when someone is drowning in family dysfunction. I look at my life now, and I see possibility. I see freedom. I see a woman who finally learned that she matters, not because of what she can do for others, but simply because she exists. A woman who learned that self-care isn't selfish, that boundaries aren't mean, that walking away can be an act of love for yourself. The sunset outside my window is beautiful tonight, painting the Chicago sky in shades of orange and pink. I have nowhere I need to be. No one making demands on my time. Tomorrow I'll go to work, help some patients, maybe save a life or two. Tomorrow night, I have book club. This weekend, I'm trying out a new recipe, just for myself. It's a small life, maybe, not the big family celebrations I once imagined. But it's mine, fully, completely mine. And that makes it more valuable than any fantasy. So let me ask you something. Have you lived through something like this? Have you watched someone you love be exploited by family? Have you been the one doing the exploiting and didn't realize it until now? Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about this. Let's break the silence together. And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you feel less alone or gave you courage to make a change, do me a favor. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel, not for me, but so this message reaches someone else who needs to hear it. Someone sitting in their kitchen right now, wondering if they're crazy for feeling used. Someone who needs to know that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's life. It's the beginning of something beautiful.